All right, well, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, so I'd like to adjourn this meeting of the Traffic Safety Commission to order on Monday, April 10th. I'd like to do one quick round. I know we're not all present tonight, but a quick round of introductions one more time. We have a student commissioner, just so if we could introduce ourselves, our name, and maybe a reason we chose to be on traffic safety or something that interests us. So I'll start. I'm Leslie Woodruff, I'm chair this year. I have been interested in traffic safety for a long time, particularly bicycle safety and pedestrian safety. So send it right on down to you. Go ahead and push this silver button so you see the red light.
I am Toby Linhart, student commissioner, and I chose to be on the Traffic Safety Commission just because I'm interested in bike safety, especially since I ride a bike a lot to get around Newberg. So.
Hello, Michael Rossman. I was relatively new to the Newberg and wanted to get more involved in this committee, and what am I trying to say, and the city in general. Thank you.
Hello, Jesse Cad, live here in Newberg, and I asked to be put on a committee, and this is the committee I was put on. So there you go.
Good evening. I'm Dan Kaiser. I think I volunteered because I'm new to the community. I've been in my professional life, I've been in roles where I've sat out there and I've testified for engineering projects, et cetera. And so I think that was part of my interest. And I think the other part is now that I live here, we have a dog. I walk the dog 3-4 miles every day. So I just, it's nice to, keep up with what's going on in the community and also have an interest in traffic safety for all modes. So.
Thank you. Come around, Sarah, will you start? And then we'll get the back table.
I'm Sarah Wilson. I'm the assistant city engineer for Newberg. I am the staff liaison for the traffic safety committee, and I like all things roads.
I'm Mike McBride, Newberg City Council. I chose this committee just because I'm interested in traffic and traffic flow. I'm an insurance agent, have been for 41 years, so I tend to look at things like that and see how it flows and what's going on with it. So
Yes.
I'm Preston Langlers. I'm the maintenance superintendent. I'm just here to provide any support I can.
Art Hoffman, city engineer for the city of Newberg.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Karn. And Tony, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tony Roos. I apologize. I'm not there tonight in person. I got hung up in Oregon City a little longer than 205 would let me get back to Newberg. With or without tolls, it still is a terrible roadway. I got involved in traffic safety committee 10 years or so ago. I'm a civil engineer by trade and live and breathe on all things roadway and multimodal transportation.
All right, thank you, Tony. We'll do roll call and then pledge of allegiance. Do I do roll call? Zen? This is my first time starting the meeting. So. Oops, one more time on your mic. Thank you.
Michael Rossman. Dan Carpenter. Neil Klein. Dan Kaiser. Tony Roos.
Present.
Leslie Woodruff.
Here.
Greg Stifler. Brett Adkins. Jesse Cad.
Here.
Toby Linhart.
Present.
Mike McBride.
here.
Okay, Thank you. Oh, will everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have public comments on the agenda, but no one here in the audience tonight. Consent calendar, we have 2 meeting minutes to approve. Did anybody see, I hope you had a chance to look through the digital copy. Were there any corrections or changes? I had 2 changes on the spelling on my name. On the January 9th minutes, my first name is Lesley. And that's in section 6, and then at the very end where I would sign. Okay, no other, give just a moment to review one last time, and then I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Second that.
And this would be both September 12th, 2022 and January 9th, 2023. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next, we have staff reports. We have police up first, but I don't see anyone from the police department tonight. Do we have a report from them on paper? Nope. Okay, moving on to engineering.
All right, I think the biggest update that we have for engineering on the project updates is for current construction, River Road. We've gotten some calls and complaints about the pavement quality that's out there currently. We've contacted the contractor and they are going, thanks. And they're going to come and pave as soon as they're gonna fill in the potholes with cold mix. And then we've asked them to move up their schedule to make it a priority for when warm weather allows itself. So it's 54 degrees and rising for asphalt, hot mix asphalt to be laid down. So we're aware that it is not in the best of condition and we've asked them to come and maintain their cold mix until it can be laid down. Bridgeton and Sherman for repaving of those streets as well are kind of on that same timeline. And then I haven't actually been able to connect with my team on Elliott Road. Do you have project update?
There was different, it flashed green
Yeah.
at me. That was a new one. So Elliott Road, I do know that the sidewalk and curb have been poured on the east side of Elliott Road from Hayworth up to the high school, and the curb is now poured on the west side from Hayworth up to the high school also. That has been completed also. So my assumption is sidewalks will come with weather cooperates a little bit better for us. And the contractor is planning on completing that portion north of Hayworth first before they get started on the stuff south of Hayworth. They want to get that back opened for the students and stuff to get into the high school as quickly as they can. So I do know that that's where that's at this point.
Thanks, Karen. I heard earlier you guys had mentioned red light running. Is that, I heard.
Yes, we had a
rumblings about it.
question. Michael, was that your question?
Yes, the question was on the status of getting the traffic safety cameras on 99W. That there was a consultant, if I recall, who's been hired to do a study, write a report such that it can be resubmitted to ODOT by the city manager.
And then can you remind me, are those traffic safety cameras different from the red light running cameras.
I believe the correct name for those is traffic safety cameras.
Okay,
Because they're much more than red light running, as any one of us who've been stopped in Sherwood making a right turn when we shouldn't or anything else, that they're much more than just running red lights.
okay, thanks.
And of course, we want to put the emphasis on all seriousness on safety and not on punitive action and avoid a bad publicity if we do choose to go forward with this.
Okay, yeah, that's a good distinction. Thank you. Okay. Karen, correct me if I'm wrong. From what I understand that there are two intersections that we were looking at. One of them we're moving forward with, and we have sent that proposal to ODOT. The second intersection that we really wanted to do has a box that is not big enough for the computer that houses the traffic safety camera. And so we've asked ODOT what they want to do with that, because it's one of those things where it's like, we want it to be updated, they want it to be updated, maybe we can come to an agreement. So that's where that's at.
Well, that's very good news. Any idea of timeline, or what is the next step, at least on the one which you have submitted? And which intersection is that? Is that the Brewster or the Springbrook, or is that the two? No. So update me on the address and what's this next status?
Okay, yes, I don't remember the intersections. Karen might.
Yeah, the intersection of Villa and 99 is the one that we are moving forward on. That is, so it has gone through what they call the region traffic safety folks, and now it moves up to the next step within ODOT to get their approval. So we're working through the process. And then it will probably still be several months out, but it's getting closer. And then the other intersection that we had looked at was Main Street and First. And that's the one that there's a concern with the size of the cabinet about whether or not we can functionally install the cameras at this point in time. So those are the two. So it's working through the process, but it's a slow and steady pace.
Thank you.
Is that the end of the?
Yes, that wraps up
Okay.
my engineering updates.
Okay,
So-
thanks, Sarah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Engineer. If this is germane to a traffic safety commission meeting, but crack sealing. I'm personally a big believer in it. I live in the greens, walk the dog all over the place. I notice all the cracks that were sealed years ago have all opened back up. Is there, what's both your strategy in that regard and any potential timeline?
We have a pavement maintenance program funded through the TUF. And one of the selections, process and criteria for all the projects that we have, whether it's crack sealing or pothole replacement or full depth reclamation, they go through priority based on severeness of the road. So like the roads score, which we have a map for, and whether or not it has utilities underneath of it that need to be replaced first. We try and get all of our investment that we put into a fix out of it. So if we're gonna do like micro pave, we want to get, 5-10 years out of it before we have to go and dig up the pipes for it. So are you looking for like a maintenance schedule of a specific area? Is that your question? Or just like, do you want to see the maintenance schedule that Newberg has planned?
I don't want to be selfish about this, so I guess I would tend to be more inclusive. But of course, crack sealing, the idea is to keep the street longer so it doesn't hit on your score to where it becomes a priority. So it's the idea is to keep it off the priority by spending a few dollars with crack seal. At least that is my layperson's understanding of it. So I would like to encourage your work group to spend a little bit of time and money on in that is worth penny now versus a pound later. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's enough on that subject.
No, we've got the money that we've allocated for this year. We want to, we act to try and spend all of that. We have it allocated for this year. We've got projects, we have infrastructure, and we need to keep investing so much money into that to keep it where it's at. So I am currently in the process of trying to decide and prioritize what that maintenance plan is actually going to be this year. So soon, hopefully I'll have a plan that I can share with everyone. Yes.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, question. So just follow up. So Sarah, apologize, I'm not too familiar with the city website, but is there a pavement service level or pavement service rating map the city posts that just shows how you scored all the roads? Kind of following up on the question. Is there, a map that might show how you scored all the various roads within the city?
We have one, but it is not shared publicly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Jesse.
Is there a reason for why it's not shared publicly? Or it just hasn't been?
It hasn't been shared publicly. Is there a reason why we couldn't share it with council members who asked or with committee members who asked?
There's no good reason. It's just, it's a very busy map and it's really tough to show that cleanly and clearly, on the website. But no, it's certainly a matter of public record and, we can share it. Like I said, it's just a matter of there's no easy way to share it to where it's, really usable by anybody. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
How difficult would it be to put together a short list of upcoming? I mean, you mentioned it before. I've heard you like, this is what we're going to work on next. You know already what you're going to work on next. Would it be like to put like a quick timeline? No official dates necessarily, but this is the progress we intend to make, say, the next 5 to 10 streets you're planning on working on and publishing it?
Yes, so we have that list and what's the next roads that were originally planned for the 2023-4 fiscal year were up in the Gemini neighborhood. What's the other roads that are up there? Vittoria. So there's like Gemini, Vittoria, and the few other roads around there. But I'm trying to determine right now, based on the progress that we've made in our list of roads that we wanted to maintain and have maintained, is that the best use of our funds when south of downtown is in the state that it's in? That's what I'm trying to determine right now. I'm looking south of downtown being like, okay, what projects have we done underground that can allow us to upgrade the pavement in this section of town? So yeah, that's what I'm weighing. So this year it was going to be that Vittoria Gemini neighborhood, and I'm trying to make sure that that's really the best place to put it. But to answer your question, we have a projected list of all the roads up for another 10 years of like, all right, we want to try and get this truck done and that truck done. So we have that list, which is great. We just don't share it because it keeps changing and rearranging as funds come and go and other projects or like capital improvement projects, right? As they come and they end up updating or repaving some of the roads we were going to go on. So that list is it's a live list, but yeah.
I totally understand. Obviously, things are going to change over time, but what I'm concerned with is I think when I talk to people and they complain about the roads, their desire most of the time is to want to know when it's going to be dealt with. So even if it was, say, updated quarterly, if there was a published list that said, here are our current plans, note this is subject to change based on number of variables that we can't predict at this time. Is that something that we could publish on the city's website so that if people ask, we can say, hey, they've got a list, you can go check it out?
Sarah, I'll jump in. We have had actually the 5-year plan of the pavement on the website in the past. So I would have to look to see what's currently up on the website, because there is some kind of a map up there, but whether or not it's current, I don't know. But yes, as soon as we get a map and a new 5-year plan, we'll make sure that that's posted.
One quick follow-up to that, I just think the emphasis should be on simplicity. Obviously, people don't want to look at a map and try to decipher it. They just want to see the simple bullet points with what the projected dates are, along with your caveats, whatever you need to put on the bottom. That's my opinion.
Yeah, Jesse, that map is a lot easier. We've shown that map before. It's the map of trying to show what all of the pavement condition indexes are for all of the streets all over town. It becomes more challenging.
And thank you, Sarah. Sergeant Hagan, do you have any police reports to share with us tonight? We went ahead and started with engineering.
I'm sorry, I was a little bit late.
That's
I was,
okay.
Out on a traffic crash coincidentally and
Uh-oh.
traffic safety issue. But I don't have anything specific, no data
Okay.
to talk about this go around. It is Distracted Driving Awareness Month, so we're participating as a police department. With that, we've got some grant funds from ODOT, which is part of our Oregon Impact Traffic Safety Program, where we get funding to go assign some officers who sign up for overtime over the month to go out and specifically target distracted driving, being on your cell phone when you're driving, essentially through downtown and construction areas. So we've got that going on. I don't have any numbers for you though, because the month isn't over yet.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to old business, we have one item, essentially, the abandoned vehicles, the issue that we had a public comment about at our last meeting in January. So it looks like we will start with an update from the police, and we also have, you saw, this wasn't in our digital packet, but tonight we do have a paper packet from the engineering department.
Yeah, the packet was way better than mine, the notes that I came up with. So I just deferred to that when I saw it today. I had created some notes on a Word document that was far less comprehensive. Is there a specific question that I can address, or I know we kind of talked about from the police perspective, there's just would appreciate a little bit more teeth in our local ordinance so that we could be more effective in enforcing this. And I wrote down some scenarios and problems that we encounter that I'd be happy to discuss. I'm just not quite sure where we're at
Okay,
as far as what you'd like to hear from me.
well, maybe let's, Sarah, if you could walk us through this packet, since we didn't have a chance to read it ahead of time. And then, that might give us some thoughts and some ideas. We could also tonight decide to move forward, or if we really want to take this home and do some more thinking, that would also be an option.
Yeah, so I made a presentation to help walk us through this packet.
Excellent. Thank you.
So. Thank you, Zen. The marching orders that we got from the last traffic safety meeting are the goals that are listed up here first. So go to the first slide, please, Zen. So last time we made a bullet list while we were kind of closing out the meeting. We wanted to clarify the goals of what was circulating around nuisance vehicles, abandoned vehicles. You guys wanted the city attorney's opinion from engineering. We wanted to hear police suggestions. We wanted a summary of the current guidance, and we wanted to know what other municipalities were doing. So that's kind of what's encapsulated in this packet. And obviously, like, the police were going to bring their own suggestions. And then I was not able to track down the city attorney's opinion from engineering last time. So in this packet, clarify the goals first, summary of current guidance by Newberg, suggestions from engineering, and again, they're just suggestions. This is your committee, but I'm just putting forth my suggestions. And then definitions by others and the research that I found on what other municipalities were doing. Okay, so I was thinking, what are the goals that we talked about last time? And it was writing enforceable language to remove nuisance derelict vehicles that are inoperable and hazard without being classist or ableist. That was kind of the conversation that we had at our last meeting. The police were saying they needed more teeth, so they needed language that was actionable, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't writing our code in such a way that was targeting people unfairly. And so out of that, I was like, all right, then we need to define nuisance vehicles, junk vehicles, derelict vehicles. What does that mean? We see it in our code, we see it in other people's code, but unless we agree on a definition, then you could always point your finger into when that trigger is hit or not in your code. So, and then name when a vehicle needs to be removed. So is it abandoned and junked, but not causing a safety issue, or is it all three? And then the next one is name when an on-street vehicle, even if a nuisance, should not be removed, like if someone is living in their car. Next slide, please, then. Okay, so the first one was the summary of Newberg's current guidance revolves around the definition of discarded vehicles. So in the Newberg Code, discarded means any vehicle which does not have a lawfully affixed license plate or has an expired license plate and is in only one or more of the following conditions: inoperative, wrecked, dismantled, partially dismantled, abandoned, and junked. And then I noticed going through the rest of my research and looking up what the other municipalities' code was, is that I think that one of the issues with moving forward may be the lack of definition of the following attributes of what it means to be discarded. So like, what does it mean to be partially dismantled? Based on the law, like Law Insider's definition, you could be missing one headlight. Is that really fair? Maybe not. So defining those and writing our own definitions for those might help us with this cause. And then there was also a case where a vehicle can have a current license plate and still be considered discarded if the vehicle is inoperative, wrecked, or dismantled. So basically the next part was Newberg, by its definition, says that you have to have a no license or an expired license. And the question is, all right, well, what if you do have a license for your vehicle? It can still be considered a nuisance if it's parked on public right of way, a city street, alley, or road. The vehicle owner or person in charge of the vehicle is given a written notice by first-class mail stating that the vehicle is in violation and they have 30 days to respond. So, can you go back one slide? There you go. Okay. Yeah, we're not ready for the next slide yet. Okay, just making sure. So my suggestions and proposals, which kind of like prime your guys' minds for the rest of the document, was if a passenger vehicle is licensed and operational and not causing a sight distance or pedestrian safety issue, then there really is not a good reason to remove it. And however, we can write additional code to define and distinguish abandoned and junked, which may allow for a more clear trigger on enforceable action. Restrictions on the distance moved can be increased. So an example is that Seattle states that a vehicle must move off the block face at least every 72 hours, where in our code is that we don't actually have a distance set. We just say it needs to be moved. This would keep people from moving their vehicles only a few inches, which effectively could allow for a vehicle's owners to use the public right of way for long-term vehicle storage. And it could be hypothesized that and using an enhanced rule like that, it has to be moved off the block face every 72 hours, could only be enforced by having a neighbor comment on it. But that's kind of how it's in action now.
Pardon the interruption, but are you taking questions?
Yeah.
On the way?
Yeah.
Quick question. So back to your definition of abandoned here.
Mhm.
So you raise it to, if I understand it correctly, right now abandoned only includes vehicles that their license is expired, tags have expired. And you're considering amending that to include vehicles that are currently licensed if they meet some additional criteria. Is that, did I hear you correctly?
No, the current code for Newberg allows room for both. So the current code is around only on the word discarded, and abandoned is actually a part of that word, a part of the definition of discarded. And what the Newberg code addresses is, okay, well, let's say someone acquired a vehicle tag or a license for their vehicle, but it's sitting on cement blocks and it's a safety issue. What then? And our code allows for, if that vehicle is located on a public right of way or a city street or a highway, then it can still be labeled as discarded.
Thank you.
Yes, Mike.
I just have a question. Is there a big issue with people that are just leaving their cars? I'm assuming we're talking about cars that are just left parked on the side of the streets. Is that really a big issue?
We've had the issue brought up several times by the public, and a few times, yeah. We had a gentleman come in and talk about it last time that we were in session. And it wasn't the first time that he'd been here. And so we decided to look into what did our code actually say about it? And what can we do in scenarios like this?
Yes, Mike, if I could add a little bit more to that, what I had understood at being my first meeting was that the police lacked some clear definition and teeth to enforce that. And that there, to Sarah's point, there does appear to be a long history and some articulate and concerned citizens on this subject.
Mike.
You mentioned cars that would be up on blocks. I haven't seen something like that in a long time. Is that, do we get complaints about that very often?
It was an example brought up by the gentleman who came in.
Okay. I mean, like in my neighborhood, my neighbor across the street, they've had both cars parked in front of their house for like a month or more, and they haven't moved it at all. Would that be a situation that where we would be asking them to move? I mean, it's in front of their house. I don't really care. It's not like it's all broken down, and so, but would that be a situation like that where we would be having somebody like the police? I don't want to use their resources for something like that. They ought to be used something more important, in my opinion. But is that what we would be asking them, or somebody to look and talk to somebody about moving them or something?
In other municipalities' code, they do talk about having someone's vehicle parked, like if it's on the face of their property, like it's in the right of way, but it's by their property, and how that can be treated differently. What this code is trying to address, though, is the lack of our ability to respond because our code is so vague when there is a safety issue. And the code can be written so that it can be vague and abused and not used well. And we're trying to make sure that we identify the holes in the code. And right now I'm just starting with the definitions on this is how it's laid out. But you're right, there's a lot of ways that it can be interpreted and viewed. And I think the police would agree that a code like this is typically enforced when there's a complaint.
I could chime in a little bit on that. The bulk of our complaints are citizen initiated. So they will call and describe a problem vehicle and that they've seen in their neighborhood. Typically, there is usually a smattering of truly abandoned cars that have vegetation growing underneath them, flat tires, up on blocks on occasion, but truly abandoned cars that there are other people who have abandoned or not technically abandoned. They belong to somebody in the neighborhood, but it might be a project car that somebody's pushed out onto the roadway that has expired tags or they intend to fix down the road. And then a neighbor doesn't like that, or there's a lot of complaints from residents off of East 9th that see a lot of these cars parked on the roadway and they feel that we're not taking action against those cars because it lowers their property values and causes blight and that type of thing. And so then there's the other smattering of people who are just truly using police as a pawn because they're mad at their neighbor, and their neighbor parks their car in front of their house and they set their watch, and 72 hours later go by and they call us and they want us to come write a ticket. And so, believe it or not, that happens. And so we're hoping for a solution to clear up the muddy water and give us a clear direction on what you guys want us to be doing out there, to really target the vehicles that are truly problems and filter out the ones that are maybe not quite as important.
Carry on, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, suggestions or proposal. Let's see, where was I to do? Oh, yeah, so. To do, no, if the passenger vehicle. Okay, so additional code for definitions. We could increase the restriction on how far it needs to be moved, like off the block face. And then it go on to talk about the reasons why people would not use a vehicle on a regular basis. And that we want to be sure that the code is providing for that. So, and what Brian just talked about was that, yeah. Let's see, what do I say here? There are many reasons why a person will use a vehicle on a non-regular basis. And if the minimum off-street parking spaces, the city code requirements are not provided for that property, it could result in the following. Neighbors parking their cars in front of other people's houses, people having to park their cars far away from their residence every 72 hours just because they don't drive the car regularly. Neighbors reporting regularly parked vehicles because they don't like their neighbor's car, or they want to use their neighbor's parking spot. So I have some suggestions, and they were make sure that we're identifying whether it's RV issue or a passenger vehicle issue. When the vehicles are in a visual obstacle or are a visual obstacle to driving and pedestrian safety. So like we have to define when that is. When the vehicles are not properly licensed or have a defaced VIN. Sorry, I get tongue tied. And then we have to define when the vehicle is classified as junk. And then I tried to be clear about that there might be a case where on-street vehicles, even if they're a nuisance, should not be removed. And one of them is, are we providing the current vehicle on-street or off-street vehicle storage for a house? So it's like someone who moved into an older home doesn't have the money or the capacity to add any property or add off-street parking. Are we punishing them for this asset in an infrastructure that wasn't there for them? And then the last one is the vehicle being used as a home? And there was a Washington State Supreme Court that upheld a ruling on a homeless man's truck was his home. So that has come up before. And we just want to make sure that we're aware of that. So I provide a table on what the parking requirements are that are seen in the design and construction standards, and then again in our code. So if it's a 1-bedroom unit or a studio, where they're supposed to have 1 parking spot. And that's required by our code. Yes, Jesse.
Sorry, if we could go back just a little bit to the issue of declaring a vehicle a home. You mentioned that was a Washington State case. What is the current situation as far as the law is concerned here in Oregon?
I did not have, I didn't look it up. Yeah. I found the case in Washington to be interesting. I was poking around their code in reference to the 1 block rule, or off the block face rule. And I found that. I thought it was interesting. But no, I didn't actually specifically look up what Oregon's response to that was. In that case in particular, they ruled the homeless man's truck a home specifically in response to a predatory towing practice that were taking people's vehicles away that they knew couldn't pay for them so that they could turn around and sell for scrap. Oops, sorry. So then I go into the existing definitions by others. And I can give you guys time to read through these. If you want me to, I can read them out loud. They get a bit wordy. But what I thought was interesting was the pattern that I saw where a vehicle could not operate under its own capacity. And that was a reoccurring sentence in a few of these definitions. And it is interesting because a lot of them will just reference each other, and trying to get down to what that meant legally is a little tricky. You want me to give you guys time to read through those definitions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Comment? Observation, I'll say.
Yeah.
I liked the two bullets for the city of Easley, South Carolina, there, on page, can I page number these in the future? The vehicle does not have a current license or plate registered, and I take these as ors, or a vehicle that is inoperable on its own capacity. Both of those are knowable facts, not really subject to interpretation or somebody's opinion or judgment. So, keeping something as easy for citizens and law enforcement to understand as possible I'm sure is one of your guiding strategies.
Yeah, I agree. I think those sum it up really well.
Other questions or comments on these definitions so far?
I would just say, a lot of work went into this. Nice job. It's very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, next time I write a report, I do want to send it out with the agenda. So I apologize for it being late.
That's okay. Okay, I think we're ready for the next part. It looks like no further questions on definitions at least.
Yes. Okay. And next slide. Awesome, thanks. So next I list a summary of what I found kind of for each place that I looked at. There's some counties, some cities, and I had some of the themes that I saw up here on the slide, which was that they have different definitions on junked or abandoned. They set different timelines on action, like we have 72 hours before there's any action versus 24 hours before the first warning. So there were some places like Hillsborough. The code does not consider a vehicle to be abandoned unless it's been sitting on the public right of way for more than 24 hours. There's another example of where a city will, after 24 hours, they get an orange sticker. And so there's different timing of different actions. And then I've seen more strict punishment for non-licensed vehicles on public right of way. There was some code that was just like, if it's unlicensed and on public right of way, get it out, period. And then they place a restriction on the distance the vehicle must be moved. In the example of Seattle, it says off the block face. Those were like the only two that I saw. It either has to be moved or it has to be moved off the block face. There wasn't really any kind of like 100 feet or something in particular. And then one example I saw was that I think it was Portland and Hillsborough have a dedicated vehicle hotline for reporting nuisance vehicles. I don't know if we need that, but it was something that they had. So I think that's it. What's next? Oh, that's it. Awesome. Yeah, that's it. That kind of takes you through the report. And then it would go back to the suggestions that I made about how do we want to define the definitions? How do we want to navigate I want to say the pitfalls that we could create in the code that we make, and what kind of, I guess, what is back to the commission now on what are your goals with this and what kind of code do you want to write?
Well, and I have a process question too. I'm trying to think through. So we're here thinking about the code tonight and, from what we've heard in previous meetings and what we're learning right now. And thinking forward, we can't authorize code, but if we were to suggest changes to code, that would come as a suggestion to council and then they would take the formal actions to amend the municipal code.
And then I know, so in light of the report, I'd love to hear some of the stories that Brian mentioned, if you haven't talked them already. So, but anyways, I just want to remind you that he said that, and I think that'd be really interesting.
Okay. Okay, so we get to talk a little bit and think as a group, what do we want to do? We've had a problem presented to us. We have some information. We have lots of examples we can hear more from. I guess we could start with, before we get to maybe suggestions, thoughts? Michael?
Yes, would it be appropriate to run a poll or a vote of committee members to find out if they wish to proceed with the construction of the code or further take this on, or have we already given ourselves a mandate that we are going to do something?
I don't think we have. We said we would look into this, but we didn't make any firm, commitment to take a specific action.
Can I make a motion that we do intend to suggest code enhancements to city council?
Okay, there's a motion. Do we have a second? Everyone's over here. I will second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. We'll take back the call for the vote and discussion. Jesse, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's possibly a good idea to do it based on what we're hearing. We've heard from the public. We've heard from the police and from engineering. I believe that what we're hearing from police and engineering is that they would like something done. And the public obviously wants something done. Is that an accurate assessment?
I'd say engineering is impartial at this point. We haven't seen a lot of hard data on our part that suggests that there's a significant safety issue. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I've identified places in the code that maybe are a bit vague and make it hard to react to these situations.
If I can be honest, I think from the police perspective, as Newberg grows, we're hoping that this will become an issue that you would want like a parking enforcement or a code enforcement division to take care of, not your police officers. But in the meantime, if you would like us to enforce this stuff, we need some better language so we're more efficient and effective.
Okay. Dan, did you have a comment?
Just going back to the last meeting minutes, I don't know if we're gonna write the ordinance or at least come up with suggestions for where we could see improvements to the language. I think Sarah's outlined some good key points for us to talk about tonight, see what we'd want to move forward with. So, and I'm in favor of doing that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. My motion was to make suggestions for code encouragement. Avoided, I do not have sufficient experience in writing code and would not want to foul things up, because clearly if vagueness is the order of the day, that's what we're looking to avoid.
Right. Right, and the writing code would come from the city staff, from the attorney and the engineering department and other professionals who know exactly how to write it. Tony, did I hear you try to weigh in on our discussion before we take a vote?
No, I was ready to vote.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So we've got a motion on the table with a second to create some suggestions for possible code language on nuisance vehicles. So I'll call for the question. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, so thank you for that process. I appreciate it. Now to suggestions, things that stood out to us that seemed that they would be particularly useful, things that we don't want to address in this code, on the other hand. As a starting point. Yes, Jesse.
Sure. Well, I think maybe starting at the goal would be a good place to start, since it's gonna drive a lot of the rest of the discussion. So the currently written goal as here was a suggested goal was to write enforceable language to remove nuisance / derelict vehicles that are inoperable and a hazard without being classist or ableist. So my concern is with that last clause, without being classist or ableist. What do we mean by these things exactly? And is it necessary to add this clause to the goal? Does anybody have any desire to be classist or ableist around the room? So yeah, go ahead.
It's we don't want to write code to remove someone's car just because it's ugly. If it works and they use it, just because they can't afford a paint job, or just because their neighbor doesn't like them, or just because it's dirty, we want to make sure that we don't write code for that. And that was just kind of a blurb in there that we talked about in our last meeting, and kind of like realized that could happen if we weren't sensitive with how we wrote the code. Sorry.
So I don't recall exactly what we talked about last time, but I don't recall that coming up. Of course, I think we don't want to be classist or ableist, depending on how you define those terms. But at the same time, I don't see it as being particularly helpful, because I don't think that we are the rest of this is going to spell out what we're actually going to do. Basically, we want to make just rules no matter what. And it would be unjust to be classist or ableist. So that kind of covers all of those factors. So in my opinion, I would like to see that clause struck. And the rest of it I do like as a good starting point, but I won't get further into it. That's my initial comment.
I think the way I read the goal, this is just sort of a gathering point for ourselves as thinking about it. Not something that would be codified. And again, just to be clear about our goals and how we're going about it is how I was reading that. Toby, yeah.
So how do you determine if someone is using their vehicle as a home? Like, how do you decide whether that's the case or not?
I don't have a clear answer for that. It would be subjective based on what the person, what they tell you. I would have no way to prove or disprove that currently. It's definitely a hurdle, and it could be something that would be used unfairly in various ways. So it would require better definition for me to be able to answer that for you. Sorry.
Yeah, unless they came out and just told you, or people observed them sleeping in their car for many days on end, then I don't know if you would know. Jesse.
To follow up with that, I would ask the question, what does it matter?
Only that, and the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court case that I brought up was that if someone is using their home, using their vehicle as a home and it gets possessed or towed, that there has been a case where they ruled in their favor. And that's the only reason I brought it up.
It's a well understood fact that the issue of car camping and people living in their cars in Newberg has come up in the past in our community. So I think it's important that if we are drafting these suggestions to city council, that we are addressing that issue head on and not trying to avoid it in any way.
Can I ask that you clarify with the city attorney what boundary issues or legal precedents that we have, legal precedents that creates boundary issues for us in the definitions as it addresses people living in their vehicles? So this is, and is it possible to tow a vehicle that it is deemed that someone is living in it? Exactly to your point. So, because I'm thinking of a lot of places in Portland where people are camping, and I don't know if they are towing those vehicles or not. Or is that just nixnay? No, you cannot tow a vehicle or you're going to find yourself in front of the state Supreme Court if they're living in it. Steve. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I've got that written down.
So a potential code would have, so clarify some definitions. And also, would the code also include, not that we were writing this, but just a question about the code itself. Would the code also include enforcement measures or, response measures of some kind, or is that code more defining terms?
There was another section of the Newberg code that it was basically referenced, and it was said, once this vehicle is found in violation, use this section of the Oregon code to respond. And I went down that rabbit hole, and it was about abandoned vehicles specifically, and then how to go about towing them. I have not taken the deep dive into wading through that verbiage. So I do know that there is a process laid out and there are terms for it in the code already, but I would defer to Brian to talk more about what was needed.
Thank you. Jesse?
Sure. Some of the suggestions on here that I thought sounded like good ideas to me, is the item about moving vehicles off the block. I do think that that's a significant problem right now where somebody can just sort of move 3 inches and say they moved their car, and that's not really, but then we have nothing to do about that. So I noticed in some of the things that the other cities were doing, there was the issue of maybe treating certain situations a little bit differently. I think it was Beaverton or somewhere was saying, like, if the car is parked directly in front of the owner's house, there was some leeway given, because obviously I can come from an environment where I know that we have some extra cars and they tend to stay right in front of our house, and someone were to complain about that all the time, that would be frustrating. So I like that idea. On the other hand, I'm also sympathetic to the concept that you shouldn't purchase vehicles if you have nowhere to put them. I've spent some years in Japan, and in Japan you cannot purchase a vehicle until the police come out and measure your parking space and validate that you have a place to put it. We're not going there, obviously, but that is there's some sort of responsibility entailed with purchasing a vehicle. So.
Well, and then I'm noticing, on the flip side, Jesse, to your comment, looking at the chart here of our code and minimum parking spaces required, I'm looking at a 3 and 4 bedroom unit. If it's, a variety of people sharing a place, 3 or 4 people, each with their own car, there are only 2 parking spaces provided. And, everybody's just trying to live and get to their job or school or whatever it is that they're doing. And really their housing has not provided adequate parking off street. So yeah, this is our question to help direct code that is fair.
When I kept trying to untangle this in my head too, and every time I came back around to whether or not there was adequate parking was like, I kept reminding myself, I'm like, okay, there's also the condition it has to meet of being like a safety or a safety hazard of some kind. And you know, if it's just a safety hazard, but a perfectly fine car, or does it have to be a safety hazard and a bad derelict car before we tow it, right? I don't know.
That's pretty clear in my mind. If it is a safety hazard, I don't care if it's a brand new car, it needs to be moved
Yeah.
or it will be towed.
Yeah, as I
And a
said,
safety hazard obviously has to be defined, right? But, yeah, if it's parked across a sidewalk, if it's parked across a sidewalk, if it's parked across a crosswalk, what I meant to say, or parked halfway into an intersection.
yeah, as I said that out loud, I realized that we tow people if they've parked on a yellow curb, right, or in front of a fire hydrant. So,
I did notice in the very front of yours, we did not kind of include that in terms of safety being a criteria. A vehicle needs to be parked safely to remain there. So.
I think we agree, the first three proposals from engineering, I think we all agree, those are good proposals to suggest. The first one about vehicle doesn't move once every 72 hours. And it's, excuse me. For passenger vehicles licensed and operational, it does not cause a site distance issue or pedestrian safety issue and moves once every 72 hours. And therefore, there is very little reason to forcibly remove the vehicle. That makes sense. But, and then your suggestion that additional code be made to define and distinguish abandoned versus junked vehicles. That makes sense, because that sounds like that's a gap on the code today. That's a hurdle for you. And then the third suggestion also makes sense. Defining some criteria threshold that the vehicle owner has to meet where they have to move the vehicle so far, whether it's off the block or 2 blocks away or whatever. I think we'll agree with that.
Simplicity should be an objective here. So I'm wondering.
Sure.
Do we really need to distinguish or parse the difference between junked and abandoned and derelict if our action is going to be the same in all the above? Back to the South Carolina example where if the vehicle can operate under its own power, then it's pick any one of those three definition. And that would be a criteria for allowing it to be parked if it was safe and if it was licensed. If it's parked safely, licensed, and it can move under its own power, then I'd suggest it not be part of this. I would point, if you go up in Northwest Portland where all the issues with not having enough parking, they've got more tenants and they've got parking spaces. What do? They've got permits, full permit system and everything. Obviously, I'm not suggesting we go to that, but there's other ways to deal with the issue when there's insufficient parking. And perhaps our code suggestions should stay towards vehicles that can't operate or aren't licensed correctly or aren't parked safely. And in that way, provide clarity for the police department. Yes.
yes, I agree. And the paragraph I wrote, and when I specifically say like abandoned versus junked, and it's because they keep referencing each other, but one thing that we don't say in our code, which other people's do, is that it can move under its own volition. And that's a part of the definition that we're missing.
We don't want Ryan out there going through his chart now. Is this vehicle abandoned? Is it
Right.
junked, derelict? Or which of these three is it? Because I've got a different color sticker that I use depending upon what Sarah determined was my definition for those. Okay.
But adding to the and I agree with you. And what I'm saying is adding to that, those definitions of can it move under its own volition is a really good way to clarify that.
Can I chime in on that? Because that's a really difficult thing for us as a police officer to show up and determine if the car is just sitting there parked, if it's functional or not. I could throw all kinds of scenarios at you if you, whenever you want.
So these, in these definitions, these, the terms for junked and abandoned, those would be some visual clues for you, not having anyone to talk to. That, that this car might fall under this category of code.
Yes, that's one of the hurdles. And of course, a secondary to that is who do we hold accountable when you find a car that is very obviously abandoned, because it's not going to be registered to the person who the license plate or the VIN number comes back to. Who do I write a citation to and leave it on the windshield? You don't know. It's not fair to penalize the previous registered owner by sending them a ticket. So that's one of the problems that we're hoping to figure out a solution for. Is there some database that we could keep a record of if a car's been warned or cited in the past, so that it then accelerates your ability to tow it and remove the problem? If you've got a neighbor who's parked a project car out in front of your house and he intends to get to it, he means to get it fixed and running, but he then gets a warning from us and he just pushes it around the corner to the next person's house, who starts that 72-hour clock. It's just we will just keep going back and forth without really holding anybody accountable for it. It's where we feel the frustration, where we need some other tool. And I'm not huge on reinventing the wheel. I'm sure there's a municipality who has written a fair code that, we could to take ideas from. But again, the examples that Sarah's done an amazing job here with this stuff, but keep in mind, a lot of those comparable municipalities, with the exception of Sherwood, they all have, full-time code enforcement and parking people who come out, and that's their specialty.
Good point about how do you prove the vehicle can operate. Sarah, extra credit to you if you want to contact any authorities in South Carolina and see how they deal with that. Or they might scratch your head. Yeah, that's become kind of an issue for the police department.
Jesse.
What can we realistically get done tonight? And do we need to suggest some kind of working group or something to continue working on this? Because if we meet once a quarter,
Right.
we can give our opinions on this and say, this looks like a good start, and it does. It's a really good start. But do we need to do some extra work, or is this?
Right. Well, I think I will ask staff, maybe, do you feel like you have enough to start with, or do you want to hear more from us? What is going to be helpful to move this forward?
Based on what you guys have said, I feel like I could take a shot at the dartboard with some code. But I really want to hear more stories from Brian, and he and I can talk about that off committee time,
Okay.
I suppose, I guess, and we could work together with that.
Okay, and I see Karen back there. Yes.
So I would recommend that Sarah and Brian certainly meet up to talk about it, but maybe if there's a couple of the commissioners that want to kind of help them start to craft some language and look at some different options between now and the next meeting in July. And then that way, hopefully, you can come back to the next meeting in July and look at whatever language is brought up with the help of some commissioners and be able to say, Yeah, that looks like we would recommend that to the city council, and then move forward on that piece of the puzzle. But it feels like it might be helpful to have a couple of, commissioners involved in a small working group to help work through that.
Any volunteers who would like to work on that? Jesse expressed some interest. Oh, and I see a hand on the screen. Is that Tony?
Yeah. As part of
Yes.
the work program, we should probably have some public involvement outreach as well with that. Before we recommend something up the hill to council.
Okay. To offer on maybe if we have a couple commissioner, create the working group and then set a date and invite public to, or send email contributions possibly.
Well, why don't we hear what our esteemed members think about this before we keep this open in terms of meetings, but they don't want to waste citizens' time either, want to have something meaningful to offer to get opinions on
Mhm. And
first.
I guess there would also be a public process through the city council. As well.
Right, absolutely.
Mhm. Thank you. Karen, there's a lot to look at. Thank you.
So the other thing I would remind the commission is, one of your, the process for a general decision, which this would be as you move through this process, because it would affect everybody within the city, is there is a process within the code that sets out how that would happen. And you would have a quasi-public hearing here in front of the commission, to make that recommendation, hear public comment, so there would be a notice requirement. So again, assuming that's on July 10th, we would set out that get that notice out to people before you guys heard it on July 10th, assuming you were ready. That would be a question for the working group and that kind of thing as you move forward.
Okay. Tony, how does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, thanks for the suggestion. Good thinking. Michael, would you also be interested in being on the work group?
I'd be interested, but I'm time restricted.
Okay. So we've got Tony and Jesse interested in being on the work group with Sarah and Brian to continue crafting some draft language and possibly having it ready for July. And
Question.
Yes.
When you say draft language, are you talking about specific code language or suggested enhancements to code language?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Taking our ideas, your ideas, examples, professional experience, and having a good solid list of things we would like the code to be able to do, but not actually drafting the code itself.
And then the next step before going to council would then be the public involvement phase.
So we would have, as Karen was saying, the quasi judicial session here. So that would, public meeting. And that would be a chance for the public to weigh in on ideas or suggestions or concerns.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions or comments?
Just a reminder, I do think, Sarah, we having some boundary conditions from a lawyer concerning the vehicles people live in will certainly help.
Okay. Thank you for the ideas so far on this topic, and thank you for taking this on. And Tony and Jesse, thanks for stepping up to do some extra work for us. Finally, that was our item of business. Any commissioner comments tonight? I'll just go around the room, starting with Dan.
None for me. Thank you.
Okay. Jesse,
No, thank you.
Michael,
Good meeting, thank you.
okay. Toby, any comments? Okay. I'll just have one comment. If it's possible to have the printing double-sided, just to use a little less paper, that would be wonderful. Thank you. We have, hopefully you saw in our agenda, attached to the agenda is the current issue log of calls that the engineering department receives. So just to see what different citizens are concerned about. Finally, our next meeting, as Karen just said, is July 10th, 2023. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, not yet. Karen.
Actually, Chair, I just want to make sure. So I do know July 10th is summer. And I know we had struggled last summer to get a quorum. Is everybody expecting to be in town on July 10th, or should we find a different date now? I just thought I'd throw that out. July 10th is what we had said we were going to meet, but we can make that change if we know now that most of us won't be here. And Tony's got his hand up.
Thank you. Tony.
I will not be here on
Okay.
July 10th.
One no already.
Well, I just suggest we work it around Tony's schedule and Jesse's schedule and folks working on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, especially if you'll be at that next meeting, if we'll have that material ready in time. I guess maybe we can send out an email a month ahead of time and remember to check our city emails.
Yeah, we can have Zen send out a doodle poll. And
Okay.
just make sure that everybody's still available and
Okay.
that type of stuff before we get there.
Okay, great. Good thought, Karen. Thank you. All right, anything else for the good of the order? Okay, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, or second
Well, no, I'm asking for a motion. It's,
Yes, maybe please adjourn.
is there a second?
second.
Okay, adjourn. Thank you, everyone.